You know, there's a term that gets passed around an awful lot these days in the world of technology, and it's disruptor. Everybody wants to talk about themselves being a disruptor in some market space or something or other. But that's a pretty big term to be throwing around, and it's one of those things that you can't really call yourself. Somebody has to call you a disruptor. And so I decided to look at a new line of matrix switches from HDTV Supply to find out if the company really was a disruptor in this space. For a long time, matrix switches have been dominated by companies like Crestron and Kramer and Shinybo. And then on the other side, you can find a whole bunch of matrix switches which are a kind of generic, made in China, not very well put together, kind of junky things, but on the other hand, they're really, really inexpensive. While you find that stuff from, for example, Shinybo, Kramer, and Crestron tend to be very expensive. I looked at this HDTV Supply Wolfpack series of matrix switches, and I asked myself, is it more like a really well-priced version of the expensive ones, or a really expensive version of the cheap ones? I set out to take a look. So my friends at HDTV Supply sent me a model for evaluation. I was able to open it up, unbox it, see what was really going on with it. And the first thing is, I was very, very surprised by the build quality. I was prepared for this to be basically a rebadged version of a generic Chinese matrix switch, but it wasn't. The branding, first of all, is silk screened on, and that's a sign of quality. It's not just a label that was stuck to it, at the last minute. And more importantly, everything about this particular matrix switch shouts quality. It's strong metal construction. All the buttons feel really good to the touch. And it's got everything you need without a whole bunch of things that you don't. What I especially liked about this matrix switch was the fact that you could control it a whole bunch of different ways. A matrix switch, in its essence, is something with a whole bunch of inputs and a whole bunch of outputs. That's what you see on the back, a bunch of HDMI in, a bunch of HDMI out. So this particular one that I tested was 8 in, 8 out. And it was very easy to use the front panel to say, for example, say the video coming from input 1 could go to 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. All I did was push buttons. Just that simple. But if I wanted something a little bit more advanced, would this matrix switch hold up? Well, the good thing is that it comes with a lot of different ways that you can control it. It's not just the front panel. Front panel's there too. But it has a built-in web server. By default, it's set to 192.168.1.80, and it reminds you of that on the front panel. But you can set it to whatever you want once you log into it for the first time, which means you could have as many multiple matrix switches as you want, and each one could have a different IP address. By logging in just using a regular web browser on PC or on your phone or whatever, you can control this matrix switch pretty much the same as if you were using the front panel. I particularly appreciated the fact that I didn't have to download some skeevy app to try to control this, just a regular web browser. Because a lot of times you look at these apps for these kind of things and they're nothing but repackaged web content anyway, and you end up downloading them and you're not 100% sure where they go. So this was a real win that all you had to do was go to a web browser, and you could set a bookmark to it or make a web app on your phone, and it just works pretty much the way you would expect. If you're really hardcore, you can connect to this thing using its built-in serial port. I honestly don't know if people still do that. I mean, maybe they do. I just haven't seen it done in a long time. But if you're one of those people who wants to communicate via the built-in serial port, it's there. I didn't test it because honestly, I didn't have anything old enough to test it with, but I do believe that it works. Basic matrix switch function was easy whether I was using the web app or the front panel. But there was more to it than that. You can actually set up scenes so that you can save different configurations. And it's all done very quickly, very easily, either through the front panel or the web app. And honestly, if you can use one, you can use the other. Very, very simple. And there's an extra added bit that you don't find on a lot of these inexpensive matrix switches. There's something called EDID that is part of the HDMI standard, and it helps define what kind of device this thing is. Oftentimes, if you get a cheap matrix switch, it won't work if you're using any sort of content-protected source. I mean, for example, a DirecTV satellite receiver, or a dish satellite receiver, even a streaming box are not going to work because they're not going to believe that they're actually talking to a television. And that's part of the HDMI standard, that it has to understand that it's talking to a television or else it just doesn't work. That's on purpose. However, expensive matrix switches do something called EDID management, and sometimes called EDID spoofing, where you can tell the device it's whatever it is, and it will send the proper information right back down to the device. You can say, okay, just inherit whatever it is from the TV, or I want this to pretend it's a 4K TV, I want this to pretend it's a 720p TV, whatever it is. You can set it all manually, and you can save all that stuff on an input by input basis. That's important if you're using something that doesn't have great HDCP enforcement. I've seen this with some older receivers where you plug them into a matrix switch and they just don't work. And they're not getting what they expect to get, and so they shut down. That's on purpose. With proper EDID management, you can avoid that. I've seen that for years on devices from Crestron and Kramer and ShinyBo, but you never see it on an inexpensive Chinese matrix switch. Partially that's because you have to pay the HDMI consortium a little bit more for it, I think. But really, I just think it's harder to implement, so the less expensive companies don't do it. However, I was able to do full EDID management with this Wolfpack matrix switch, and it worked perfectly. I ran a variety of devices through it, and I never had any content protection issues. That's the good news. So you might be asking yourself, where can I get this matrix switch? Because honestly, it comes in at a price about half that of other matrix switches with comparable quality and features. Well, you can get it exclusively at solidsignal.com. If you want to know more about it, call us at 888-233-7563, and we'll be happy to explain how it can be part of your existing setup or even help quote you a whole new setup for your bar, for your hospitality, for your hotel, for anywhere that you want to have multiple ins and multiple outs. Even if you're the sort of person who wants to run the most massive, awesome man cave or whatever you want to call it, we'll do that for you. Learn what real customer service is about. Call 888-233-7563 to find out more, or shop at solidsignal.com.